This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My guest today is Amanda Wideman. Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to join you tonight.
It is great to have you. Can you take us back to a very interesting experience you had in August of 2017?
Yeah, so on August 17th, 2017, I'll remember that day forever. I was driving home with my ex. We had been on a camping trip and we were on a high mountain road. He was driving, I was in the passenger seat. And if the road is here, the mountain went pretty much up from the road. And on this side, like a big drop off and like a little concrete guardrail. And a car that was in the oncoming lane lost control and came into our lane. It looked like he was headed straight for us. So then my ex, he swerved our car onto the shoulder, which was a skinny little gravel shoulder. And then we did miss that oncoming car. But when we did that, when our car made that swerve and then kind of headed back for the road, there was way too much of a momentum and we lost control and our car spun a couple of times horizontally and we did end up colliding with another car. So we got in the wrong lane. And then after we crashed into that other car, we landed upside down. So the roof got crushed and the wheels were facing up. And the car ended up upside down and resting on that concrete guardrail. So the front of the car, the hood, front seat, it's kind of like dangling over the edge of the cliff, and the back seat, kind of like a seesaw, the back seat and the trunk were on the road side. And we were kind of, when the cars just finally stopped, we were kind of curled down in the fetal position because the roof was crushed. So that's what happened. It's a little bit play by the accident. But for me, what happened was really different. So as soon as the car lost control, I had this really split second idea that I really believed we were going to go off the cliff. I was familiar with the area. I'd actually worked in that area as a paramedic. And typically cars just go over the cliff there. It's a pretty dangerous road. Even if you're going regular highway speeds, a collision can just like put you over the edge. So as soon as we lost control, I just remember us swerving onto the gravel shoulder. And then I closed my eyes, just kind of instinctually, I closed my eyes and I leaned back into my seat and I relaxed all the muscles in my body. And I just desired to die peacefully. I did everything in a very short amount of time. I was like, okay, let's go. Kind of like when a plane's taking off and it's too late. You just have to go with it. And then for me, I started to have what I now call an out-of-body experience, which I don't remember ever having one in my life. And even though this happened very fast, I'm going to kind of say the things one by one because a lot happened in a short time. And time did slow down for me. It seemed like time slowed down. And that's really hard to put into words, but I'll just put that out there. The first thing I noticed was I no longer had my senses about me. So everything was black. And I didn't feel anything on my skin, like the seatbelt or my skin or anything like that. I didn't feel any heaviness in my body and I didn't have any hearing. It's like it got muffled or like someone had put in earplugs. And so my five senses really shut down. I started to feel this unbelievable lightness that I had never, ever experienced before. I was still fully aware, maybe even more aware than ever, but without the body. And we're always carrying around this body with us and we don't think twice about it because we're so used to it. But suddenly I was without, 150, 170, whatever pounds that I had to to deal with. And it felt so freeing. And if you ever have had, a really vivid dream and you wake up and you remember all the details and it was very real, you also know that you didn't really have a body in that dream. But it was so much different than a dream, because in a dream, it's kind of fuzzy. It's kind of like filmy. But this was the opposite. It was way more crisp and way more clear. And it seemed way more authentic than any dream. And also it seemed like everything was more real than anything on earth. So I'm suddenly in this black space where I don't see anything, but it has a quality to it that is a little bit familiar, a little bit soft, a little bit safe and secure, almost pillowy, feathery. I even say like a little bit feminine. And in that space, I'm just going back here. That's why I close my eyes so I can get it as accurate as I can. It was as though I was not by myself in that space. So the senses are gone. I'm in this soft black space that's not frightening at all. And I'm very much not alone here. So although I couldn't see or recognize any religious figures or ancestors or any of that kind of stuff, I felt extremely surrounded by what I call the presence. That's the best word I've come up with, because I feel like there wasn't a word. It wasn't as though I was in the presence of one other being. It was as though I was in the presence of many, many, many beings that exist outside of time and space, that exist outside of the body. And my sense was that it was the all, divinity, all of the highest exalted divine spirits of people who had ever lived, angels, healthy and well ancestors, other divine beings. It just seemed like I was being surrounded by almost like a choir of that just seemed to go on and on and on. And at first it was like, whoa, what is this? But then it started to feel very, very familiar. And once I had, in a few seconds, I guess, but once I had adjusted to where I was, there was this real welcoming feeling, this real familiarity, as though I felt that I had come and gone through this dimension many times. And I don't call this heaven. I had the sense that there was dimensions and dimensions and dimensions to go. I like to call it the threshold of a higher dimension. And that familiarity, it wasn't just that I was familiar with the place. It wasn't just that I was familiar with who was there, although I was both. There was a familiarity about who I really am. And I think that this is the most important part for me of this out-of-body experience. Because I no longer had the body, the personality, the ego, the identification with like the story of Amanda, there was a lot of other things that I also didn't have that I now realize are connected to the body and the personality and the ego. I didn't have any worry. I didn't have any anxiety. I didn't have any apprehension. I didn't have any awkwardness. I didn't feel the need to hide or put on a filter or adjust how I was there to please anyone. It was as though I was completely naked in the most innocent, pure, childlike, free aspect of myself. And that is how everybody else there was. If you weren't in that zone, you would be very out of place. And I wonder if a soul or a spirit could ever even get there if they hadn't left behind those other things, even temporarily. And so the next part that came was this relief. And I think that for myself, it was like the relief that I didn't know I had been looking for my whole life. Where even though many of us have loving families, friends, communities, there's always that separation that's natural as being a human. We're all so different. But up there, all of that stuff got dropped from me temporarily and those other beings. It was like we could see each other for who we really were, and there was no judgment, no condemnation, no feeling out like, oh, are they really like they say? It was just so clear. And I've never been in the presence of another being, living or dead, spirit or human, where I felt like I was really understood. There was no misunderstanding. And I also felt that there was an ancientness, a real ancientness that went with us, whoever we were. But as spirits, I felt that we had, or at least I had come and gone through that place, knowing those other beings many, many times. And that my life as Amanda, which I wasn't thinking about there at all, although I probably could have located it, but it seemed like the car accident, it seemed like everything had gone on like pause. Just the pause button on the accident, and then a timeline and an experience of all this remembering, all this connection, just kind of went on up here. So even though it was a couple seconds car accident, there's a different timeline that was going on that was basically allowing me to go through these rememberings. There was a lot of bliss as well, probably naturally with dropping all of those, human pieces. And as quick as that happened, suddenly I found that I was in my body and I was upside down, and we were hunched over and we were alert. Neither of us had gone unconscious, and there was emergency services and people trying to get us out of the car. So that's what happened that day.
Now, do you feel like that was a near-death experience? Do you think you died? Or do you think just the shock of what happened sent you there?
Yeah, I have a strong belief that if a person believes that they're going to die, they can leave the body. And I have heard that like a classic near-death experience, like on paper, someone is supposed to pronounce you dead. No one pronounced me dead, obviously, but I definitely slipped out of my body in what I believe is a very similar way that would happen in a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience. It's actually all very similar because after this accident, I did end up having some other out-of-body experiences as well. So I think one of the big things is either, yes, you are going to die or you do die, or your belief is so strong that you're going to die that you do pop out. And this should be actually, for me anyway, a big relief for people who, we're all going to die one day. And when it's time to go, the spirit knows. The spirit's going to go. Yeah.
Well, and I've heard other people say that too, that they popped out before they could have died, and sometimes they didn't die, sometimes they did. Now, I want to talk more about that presence, because so many of us are so curious about that sort of thing. I mean, what did this presence look like?
So there was no visuals for me. There was no visuals at all. It was all, I was just very aware of this familiarity. It was more telepathic. So there's no visual that I can give you other than, and when I say black, it's not exactly like when you close your eyes and it's black. It almost had this hollow cave-like feeling to it. As though I was being held. As though there was like this holding, this secure sense where I wasn't going to like float off into an abyss, but there was no visual.
One thing that I heard you say one time is that the presence found you as interesting as you found it. And I think you're a very interesting person, but that still seems so amazing.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So there is this sense of, I would say, loving curiosity, where I liken it to. I remember I would see my grandfather, once or twice a year, and when I would get reunited and visit him when I was young, I remember him wanting to know all about what I had been up to. He wanted to see my art. He wanted to know if I was playing the piano. Did I like school? And I had his full attention in those moments. And he would just delight in hearing my stories and my answers. And so that's my best version of Earth comparison. I felt as though this presence had been waiting to interface with me and to reunite with me just as long or as much or more as I had been waiting for it. But I didn't know that this is what I had been waiting for. Now, I know I hear people say all the time, and I'm in this crowd where sometimes it feels like, oh, I just want to go home. I just want to go to my real home where I'm known and understood. Maybe that's heaven, whatever. We have this soul longing, and this is what I had been longing. I was reunited with that. But being on earth, I didn't know that this is what I'd been longing for.
And you knew that presence and you knew the beings around you for eons. So what do you think you've been doing for eons?
Yeah, that's another good question. I've been asked this before, and I can only speak for myself. But in the years that followed, just doing a lot of soul searching and integration, I really got the sense that that we are part of God. There's so many ways of putting it, but basically, we're fractals, we're extensions, we're children, we're totally connected to divinity. We embody divinity. And in order for us to explore and know ourselves and learn important lessons that allow us to evolve, we need to have a temporary forgetfulness. Because in the spirit world, and this is more based on some of my other out of body experiences, but in the spirit world, it's very easy to see truth. Everything is obvious. There's no hiding anything out there. And that's wonderful. But you also don't really need to try. You can be aware of something and then it materializes, and everyone has love for each other in the upper realms. But that love has no way of being tested, and there's not like a quick way to evolve. So coming to Earth, I believe, provides a temporary forgetfulness for us as spirits to jump into an Earth body, a gender, a personality, a family line, and have, a set of experiences, many of them extremely challenging, in order for us to truly develop and reconnect with love and who we really are. And coming and going many times from Earth allows us to have many of these different experiences. And when we come back the next time, our soul has maybe our mind and our brain doesn't remember, but our soul has that memory of some of our abilities. Sometimes you see kids who come in and they're extremely empathic and they can understand their parents' problems better than their parents can have empathy for themselves. I see a child like that as someone who's come and gone and has been really tested in love many times, and they've just come back again, and their soul carries those abilities to have great deals of compassion. So as we come and we come and we come and we go and we come again, we're just developing that soul more and more and more through very varied experiences. But we do eventually go back, probably through a similar threshold as where I went to. And there is there's a reunion, and there's a more of a remembering and a rejuvenation and yeah, a resting period before coming back. It's not like we just like go and come back, go and come back. There is integration and that type of thing. This is what I believe. But Earth, I do see Earth as a school, and a lot of people would maybe not see it that way. But I think at a certain point, when we notice patterns in our life, and we see these young kids coming in, it starts to become a lot more clear that that's what's going on.
When you're on the other side, do you kind of meld with everything? You always hear people talking about we are one. You kind of alluded to this. Do we lose our sense of self at all on the other side?
Right. This goes back for me to different dimensions. And so it would be very shocking for the soul spirit to pop out of the body and then to 100% lose its boundaries. And it wouldn't make sense in the learning process either. If you just, I mean, so it seems like there are different dimensions that a person moves through when they're out of the body or after they've died. And at first, at least where I was, I could still have a strong awareness of Amanda and the personality. I wasn't so far into these higher dimensions. And I believe that had I been there longer, and this is again based on other out of body experiences, that first few dimensions has a lot to do with life review, with making sense of some difficult experiences that haven't yet been processed. And so in that way, there's not this sudden melding and enmeshment, because we still have these, in the Eastern traditions, we call them impressions or samskaras. We still have these imprints that aren't quite resolved. And so those first dimensions are not a judgmental, tormenting place. They're a place to make sense of, oh, okay, now that I have this higher perspective and I'm outside of the body without any influences and filters, I can kind of make sense of some of these imprints. But as the dimensions move along and we go through, okay, I've made sense of this. This has kind of been purified. I've dropped this attachment or this resentment. Then we're more clear to go into higher dimensions. Because if we go into these higher dimensions with some of these heavy baggage, we're not a vibrational match. It's not going to work. Never going to get there.
This life that we're in feels so real, but you and many others have said that that is so much realer than this. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. Just give me a moment here. Yeah. So out there, it's like, I'll give an example. I had an out of body experience a couple of years later that, and some of the ones that came later, I feel were building on that first big one with the car accident. It gave me a bit of a gateway to be able to jump out of my body easier after that really traumatic one. And I connected very temporarily with my higher self, or a higher self. I believe our selves go up in the dimensions too, but a higher version of myself, as well as a higher version of some of the people that I know, some of my friends and acquaintances. And up there in those higher dimensions, not only did they have a similar look to them, so I could recognize who they were, it was obvious, and they still were them, but there was this kind of advanced way of being where we could talk and interact, but we could also glance down on Earth and see what was going on. We could see the Earth version of ourselves. And what that looks like from up above, it's kind of like when we look down and see ants. They can't see us. They're very busy and focused on what they're doing. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is more. And so when up there we're looking down, we just see the limitations of our consciousness and limitations of our awareness and perception. When that Earth version of us down here looks up, all we see is clouds and blue sky. But up there, we see both. We see both. We see how things work in the big picture. We see causes and effects. And we look down there as well. So it's like we're holding two different realities that are very connected. However, down here, it's very limited.
Amanda, I have so many more questions for you, but let's go ahead and take that into part 2.
Sure.
Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.